All right, guys, so CES week is now upon us, and we're getting probably, I think, the most surprising camera announcement from Nikon in here, and that is the Nikon D780. And I say that because the D750 came out in 2014. That's actually the same year that the iPhone got a screen bigger than 3.5 inches. So that is almost 6 years ago. And I really thought that that camera was going to be completely discontinued. But here we are, we now have it. And really the easiest way to talk about this camera is to say that Nikon took a Z6, threw it into a D750 body, and that's about calls it quits right there. I mean, that's pretty much sums it up completely. And that's kind of been a trend that we're seeing in a lot of DSLRs, is they're getting a lot of the live view performance from the mirrorless cameras, and that's been pretty much what sums up a lot of the things about these cameras that make them now the 2020 series of cameras. However, the Z6 has been my favorite hybrid camera. I'm actually shooting with it now. So it kind of makes me wonder if you shouldn't get a Z6 instead. But we'll circle back to that in a little bit. So because of this, we're talking about a 24.5 megapixel sensor. It's backside illuminated. You've probably seen it before in a Z6 spec list, and it's a really good sensor. I don't want to sound negative on this. It has a great compromise between a good low light performance and amazing dynamic range and overall just great image quality. So it's one that I like the most. It's going to be processed by the exact same processor in the Z6 as well, which you would think would be a huge step up from the 2 generations older one that's in the D750. However, we're still rocking 7 frames per second, which is essentially the same as the D750. I think that one quoted 6.5 frames per second exactly. And despite this now having dual UHS 2 card slots, which are a lot faster in the card slot and then much faster in the actual read and write rates of the cards themselves. So most of the time I'm shooting it slower than 7 frames per second, but I always like having the option of going higher when I need it, and I can't help but think that Nikon is really limiting things here. Now, if you do need faster shooting, you can throw this into live view, into electronic shutter or silent mode, and you will get up to 12 frames per second on this, but it's gonna come with some limitations, both in image quality, dropping into a 12-bit file, and then with focusing and the ability to potentially get rolling shutter and things like that. So 7 frames per second is going to be using the optical viewfinder in full DSLR mode at 14-bit RAW files. And again, probably plenty for most people on there, but I do think that this camera should be a little bit faster considering it's been almost 6 years. We're dealing with new processors, the same resolution as before, and just overall some big improvements. Now, one of the main differences between a DSLR and a mirrorless camera is going to be the focus system, where this DSLR has a separate module for AF technology on here. And I think this was a good opportunity for Nikon to take things to a new level and kind of separate this from their mirrorless line and say, look how good it focuses in the DSLR mode on this. It is fast and accurate and all this kind of stuff. However, we're really dealing with the same system as the D750. So 51 points, 15 are cross type, which is kind of a little small for today's technology on here. It's not a bad system, but I was hoping for something a little bit better. We're getting a new algorithms, or the algorithms from the Nikon D5, they say, which again is also pretty old camera right there. They haven't said we're getting new algorithms from the D6 or anything like that. And then also, I just hope that maybe they would have thrown in an improved system, or maybe the 153 point system from the Nikon D850 or something like that to kind of justify this over a mirrorless camera, but it is not here. We do at least have an upgraded scene recognition system here, which when combined with the faster processor and the new algorithms, it should make things a little bit better than the D750. It's just not better by a huge amount, and we're still dealing with a fairly limited amount of points, and they're all kind of chunked a little bit closer towards the center. Now, of course, you can always throw that into live view, and that's where Nikon is going to pull those 273 points from the Z6 on sensor AF system and use them in this camera. And you know, the D750 was pretty much useless at focusing in live view, so this is a huge step up if you had a D750 before. Now, I still think that Nikon's mirrorless camera autofocus system is slightly behind Canon and a good ways behind Sony, so it's not the most advanced, amazing system on the market right now. But again, compared to the D750, it is a huge step up. And then compared to the Z6, you have the exact same autofocus system, or you can bump it up to the viewfinder mode to get the DSLR system. Another upgrade here is that you can control the system from the touchscreen, which is a very good 3.2-inch screen, much better than you would get on, say, a Sony, slightly behind Canon screen technology here, but again, a big upgrade from the D750. The camera is also a really robust camera, and a lot of pro upgrades are in here as well. So just like before, you have a significant amount of weather sealing. We do have some hardware upgrades as well, like USB-C, which you can use to charge your camera as well. And while it is the same battery as before, which is a good thing, the battery life has been upgraded and improved quite a bit. Honestly, the biggest upgrade in this camera is probably going to be in video because, yeah, 2014, that was a long time ago. So yes, we are getting things like 4K at up to 30 frames per second. Again, think a Z6 here. You're getting 1080p to 120 frames per second. You have crop modes in those, so it's very good. You have things like focus peaking, the ability to output 10-bit log on it, just like the Z6, to an external recorder, HDR, HLG formats, time codes. Again, super high-end video specs. There is no talk about the ability that the Nikon Z has via an upgrade to use ProRes RAW on this camera, so probably technically a step down from the Z6 for video. But it also doesn't have image stabilization, just the nature of this being a DSLR versus a mirrorless camera. You can't have that in the camera. So there are some trade-offs when it comes to video. So despite this being one of the signature improvements for the 2020 version of the Nikon D780, it still seems to fall behind the cheaper Z6 when it comes to video specs. There are a few smaller upgrades here. So your shutter speed can now go to an 8,000th of a second. Personally, I think that should be the bare minimum for cameras that are in this mid-grade, not beginner level cameras. So it's good to see Nikon kind of agreeing with that statement and putting it in here, but I think it should have been in here originally. You also have upgrades to, like, the USB port is now USB-C. You can do like focus stacking and stuff as well now. We've come a long way in 5 years with Bluetooth and Wi-Fi, so both of those are heavily upgraded from the D750. Nothing unique for the D780 here. You're going to see these kind of specs and abilities in a lot of Nikon's other cameras, but they are here and it has come a long way from what we saw in the D750. Now the pricing on this camera is listed at $2,300, $2,299 for the body itself and $2,800 with the lens, which, if you ask me, is just too expensive to hold that retail value for long. That's $600 more than the Z6 on sale right now, with an adapter to be able to use your F-mount lenses if that's a thing that you want to do. It is $1,200 more than the sale price of the D750. Now, I know those are sales and this is a full retail value. However, I think this is going to start to push the D780 to sale very quickly because it just doesn't compete with those cameras that are on sale. And most of those cameras are always on sale just because they're older and not been selling as well anymore. So camera manufacturers are pushing those out, or the retailers are pushing them out. So it is going to be a tough sell unless Nikon starts throwing in some discounts to this fast. So my thoughts on this is, if you're a Nikon shooter already, and I personally have been shooting Nikon with pretty much everything, again, 2 Z6s recording this right now, there are probably 2 reasons to consider this camera. But there are a couple more that you might want to not consider this camera. And the main reasons to consider it are going to be the dual card slots, which even the Nikon Z6 does not have. So if you want and need dual card slots and staying Nikon, your choices are going to be this camera or the more powerful D850, which, again, from an image standpoint is a much bigger upgrade, especially with autofocus, but you lose some of the live view and video abilities that this will actually be better on than a D850. Or you could go with a Z6, which only has one XQD card. There are a lot of other cameras kind of in this price range, like Canon series, that don't have dual cards as well. So that's kind of the main upgrade feature I would see on this camera versus moving to some of the other systems. And then the other upgrade on this compared to like a Z6 would be that this camera uses both the mirrorless version of an autofocus system and the DSLR one, which is a little bit better for certain things like in extreme low lights on Nikon. The Z6s struggle with that a little bit more than this one will. However, I think that Nikon really hasn't given us a lot of improvements on the autofocus system, so it kind of takes away from some of that justification. On the negative side, you don't have access to Nikon's new lenses, which if you get a Z6 with an adapter, you can use both series of lenses as long as you don't mind an adapter. And then also you don't have image stabilization in the body, which you would get on a Z6. And then third is going to be that price. I mean, talking about $600 difference between the Z6 on sale, whether it stays there or not, we'll have to see. You check out my review on the Z6. You can also check out my thoughts on it 1 year later, why I'm shooting with it right now. I think for a lot of you, that might be a better choice than the D780. It's not that this is a bad camera at all. It just kind of feels like a camera that should have been out maybe a year or two ago, and it doesn't give a lot of compelling options over some of the other options out there, or even Nikon's own mirrorless cameras, except for that dual card slot that kind of helps to justify it. So let me know your thoughts below, guys. Hit me up in the comments. Stay tuned. Please like and subscribe. I got some cool videos coming up soon.